Further, we know that Luke has simply edited Matthew by taking the saying from Matthew, which is also an embellishment of Mark's passage, and pushing it way beyond the original meaning. Here is the saying as Matthew penned it, which is still an embellishment of Mark's version. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Here, Jesus is not made to command his would-be followers to hate their parents, but only to love him more than they. No violation of the fifth commandment here. But Luke decided to push this into hyperbole and make the entire passage a stern warning from Jesus to count the cost of discipleship. Here is the original passage from Mark, which says nothing at all about loving Jesus more than one's parents. When he had called the people to himself, with his disciples also, he said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." If we simply ignore the clear reality that later evangelists edited the earlier ones in order to improve upon them, we're still left with Luke, the author, who made his Jesus exaggerate the truth in order to drive home Luke's point. Facts are not always sacred to a New Testament writer. Now back to Paul. Since Paul's goal was not to argue for Jesus' humanity, but was to show Adam as the cause of our troubles and Jesus as the solution, it was convenient for Paul to call Jesus a man in order to maintain the symmetry of his comparison-contrast setup. Remember that Paul elsewhere refers to Jesus as a being who simply took on the likeness or physical appearance of a man. So if Jesus looked like a man, and Paul desired to contrast Jesus with an actual man and link them via their roles in salvation, it is easy to see that Paul could call Jesus a man and be using that term loosely, just out of convenience to maintain his contrast, just as the author of Hebrews, Matthew, Luke, and other New Testament writers also fudged the facts. Just as God wasn't really a male with testicles and a penis, Paul's Jesus was only a man in the sense that he had transformed into the shape of a man, while descending through the levels of heaven, in order to trick the demons or rulers of this age into killing him. It's also interesting to note that the term Son of Man, which is a euphemism for human being, is never used at all by any of the epistle writers to refer to Jesus. The two references in Revelations are not used as an epithet or label for Jesus, but as more of a euphemism, meaning human being. The two references in Revelations actually support the fact that Jesus merely took on the appearance of a man, but did not actually become a real human being. And in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like to a son of man, clothed to the foot and girt round at the breast with a golden girdle. We see Jesus described as looking as a human being again in Revelation 14:14. "And I saw, and lo, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sitting like to a son of man, having upon his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle." The term Son of Man is only used as a direct label for Jesus in the Gospels and Acts, and it appears 85 times. To think that Jesus would have referred to himself as the Son of Man so often, without the other epistle writers mentioning it even once, is quite telling. Again, if God had a son, that son would necessarily be a God, but not necessarily a human. Paul never knew a human Jesus, as that would have put Jesus in contact with sinners, which contradicts the author of Hebrews' claim that Jesus was separate from sinners. A human Jesus would have made his sacrifice take place on earth, which contradicts the author of Hebrews' claim that Jesus' sacrifice took place in heaven, in a perfect tabernacle not made by human hands. Further, simply having human flesh would have caused Jesus to be corrupt and sinful, according to Paul. The only answer that makes any sense of all this is that the earliest Christians believed in a heavenly Son of a heavenly God, who, like the Hellenistic savior deities, had performed his sacrificial act in heaven, as we learn from Hebrews chapter 9. His blood, although not human, was spilt in a heavenly tabernacle not made by human hands. He merely took on the likeness of mankind, a physical similarity in order to deceive the demons into killing him and carry out God's plan. This shapeshifter was not born on earth, but in heaven. This is why Paul and the other epistle writers tell us nothing of Jesus' adventures on earth. They knew of no human Jesus. Their Jesus was a God much like the other Greek and Roman gods, of which the New Testament writers were all familiar. A God created in their image, in the image of Anthropos. Well, to summarize, it looks like Paul is using Anthropos in a loose way. He's using the term loosely when describing Jesus. And we learn this because we can notice in the two passages where Paul uses Anthropos, Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, he's comparing Adam to Jesus. Nowhere else in the New Testament outside the Gospels and Acts is Jesus referred to as Anthropos. And in these two passages, the common theme here is that Paul is comparing Jesus to Adam. And the Hebrew word Adam meant man. And so it behooved Paul to keep the symmetry intact. We looked at Hebrews and compared Hebrews 9, and the same exact arguing tactic is used by Paul in Romans and 1 Corinthians 15. Paul is trying to draw similarities and differences between Adam and Jesus. The author of Hebrews was trying to draw similarities and differences between the high priest on earth and Jesus, the heavenly high priest. And so, in order to make the argument stronger and keep the parallels intact, Paul referred to Jesus as a man because Jesus did take on the shape or the physical appearance of a man when he descended through the levels of heaven to be killed by the demons in the lowest level of heaven. And so, in a sense, Jesus could be referred to as a man because he looked like a man and he did take on a physical form in order to die and be crucified. So, there's the answer. It just involves a little bit of examining of some precedents in Hebrews and some other places where we see that what's being said is not always intended to be taken literally. Well, that's it for now. No idea what I'll tackle next, but I'll probably stay on these objection verses. So anyway, catch you next time.